Hey guys, it's Alan. This is an introduction video to the AJA HUD. All the information you need about the HUD is in the detailed written documentation, but based upon a lot of the feedback from the beta users, I thought a video would be very useful to a lot of players. I'll be talking about a couple things in this video. First off, I want to cover a couple common mistakes that players are consistently making in the install and the performance type upgrades. Most of this video is going to be about using the HUD in gameplay. I'm going to be doing a detailed review of the badges, how I use them to adjust my frequencies and ranges. I'll be going over the pop-ups, how do I find the information I need in the pop-ups, both the stats and the range graphs. And then lastly, and throughout the video, I'm going to be selling the use of our default HUD. A lot of work went into achieving our goals of accuracy and efficiency with our HUD design. I've been using the same HUD design for more than 5 years, fine-tuning my HUD design on a near weekly basis. I was really tied to that HUD. It was my baby. And then when we started developing the AJA HUD, my programming partner had a radically different design. And I was pretty resistant to it, but because he's brilliant and everything else, I decided I would give it a try. And once I got into the logic of it, spent about 2 weeks using it. Yeah, I would never go back to my old HUD. This is a significant leap in HUD efficiency, and I really think that's a very I think that's an overlooked and very important a piece of maximizing your hourly win rate. We don't want to spend a bunch of time mucking around in our pop-ups looking for stats. We don't want our HUDs filled with information that we hardly ever use. We just want to sit down and play and be able to quickly get the information that we want. And our HUD is the culmination of our work to achieve those goals as much as we possibly could. The installation process should be pretty painless. Just follow the steps in the installation email. If you have any problems with installation, just email us at support or Skype and we'll get you figured out. Before you process your notes, I would recommend doing the first 2 steps of the NoteCaddy Performance Guide. The NoteCaddy Performance Guide is in the folder on your desktop labeled NoteCaddy Coaching Package. That'll be put on your desktop as part of your installation process. There's 2 steps in here that I think are really critical to HUD performance, and I think you should stop note creation now and go ahead and do these. The first one is updating Windows, making sure that all updates are installed. Secondly is installing Postgres 9.0. As a default, Holder Manager 2 uses 8.4, which is a good version, but not the fastest version for our HUD. The biggest mistake that we see players making is they go to this address to download 9.0 and they just grab the highest version. That's not correct. We've tested this HUD with every Postgres version, and 9.0 by far is the best version for our HUD. You'll also need to do these adjustments to the Postgres configuration file. I know this probably looks a little bit daunting at first if you're not a computer guy. I'm not a computer guy, far from it, and I was able to do these steps pretty easily. As always, back up any file or any document that you make changes to. Back that up and save that someplace else just in case there's any problems. Now, once you upgrade to Postgres 9.0, you're going to need to re-import your hands. You can find all your played hands in the CHM2 archive file. Just go to your C drive, look for HM2 archive. They're stored by site and by date. Now, one of the things about our HUD, you probably already know this since you purchased it, is the HUD does thousands and thousands of internal calculations. And so the more hands it has to plow through, the slower the HUD is going to be. So when you're reinstalling hands, only install hands that you actually use. In my opinion, having hands that are older than 3 months old is probably not a good idea. They're outdated enough that they're not going to necessarily be that useful. But also, our HUD is all about accuracy, and each stat has individual sample sizes, and the vast majority of hands that are older than 3 months aren't being used. The HUD's just having to churn through those hands as part of checking for sample sizes, and so better not to even have those hands in your database. And especially with this first run of our HUD, I would do it with as small as possible database. See how things work. You can always add more hands later if you're happy with the performance. But yeah, those first two steps are pretty important. And I also like doing the 9.0 upgrade before you even start, because if you end up doing it later, and there's a really good chance that you are going to end up doing it later, you have to rerun all your notes after you upgrade anyway. And this will save you having to wait several hours or maybe a day for NoteCaddy to run through your current database, and then maybe having to do that all again. And just by spending, I don't know, probably won't even take 30 minutes to make these upgrades. Updating Windows can be if your Windows aren't updated, that can be a little bit longer process. But as far as step two, that's not that big of a process. Now, all the steps after this are also helpful, but these are all things you can do after you've already run your notes, and you won't have to rerun your notes after you've done them. Now, if you get through all these upgrades and you're still having performance issues, the dynamic HUD, it's either time to upgrade your computer or switch to our premium HUD. Premium still is very nice. It's not nearly as nice as the dynamic HUD, but it's still a very nice HUD. Next step will be to learn your new HUD. I would start out with badges. There's two documents. There's two other documents in your NoteCaddy coaching folder. One is your badge document. The other one is a HUD document that has all the pop-ups and HUD design. Like I said, I would start with badges first. I would memorize the legend first. By memorizing the legend, the color shading, the dashes, the initials, you're going to be able to identify the vast majority of badges very, very quickly. And everything I'm about to explain is all in this document, but I want to highlight some stuff. What I did is, first off, after my notes were ran, I made a bunch of screenshots, threw them on my iPad, and then whenever I had a spare moment, I would go through a couple of tables, going through each player's HUD, and as quickly as I could, go over each badge and describe what that badge was as quickly and concisely as I could. Later, once I had the badges memorized, I would also state how that badge would affect my ranges. So it would be something like, this badge means I do this with this range. And this is what I think you'll get most out of this video. Is how I develop those game plans. We're going to be talking about that here in a few minutes after I get through how the badges are constructed, the badge logic. So everything is color-coded, and we put a lot of effort into making these badges as intuitive as possible. So everything's color-coded. Yellow is versus cutoff opens, orange is versus button and small blind. Anything that's pink has to do with a pre-flopped re-raise pot. Post-flop, green is on the flop, blue is for turn, red is for river, and then purple is versus flop raises. Also be aware of the location of the badges. All these versus steel badges, there's also a couple badges like a limping badge and a play strong hands passively pre-flop badge that go on the first row. Everything in the second row is going to be 3-bet, 4-bet, 5-bet squeeze type pots. Post-flop, the first row is for their play as the pre-flop aggressor only. So in order, when you're using these badges, it means that they opened pre-flop or they 3-bet pre-flop, and now they're on the flop. And this will really help you with the memorization of badges. A lot of times guys have trouble remembering what the knife means. Does it mean that I stab or they stab? Well, if it's them as the pre-flop aggressor, it can't be anything about them stabbing. A stab is a move by a player who was the pre-flop caller. And so automatically you should be able to extrapolate from that a V knife means that they are exploitable versus a stab. The blue background tells you that it's on the turn. So if they miss the flop C-bet in position, now they're on the turn and they have this blue badge, it means that they mathematically fold enough that you are able to stab with a wide range. The white top means that they have reached a higher level exploitability. Every badge has two levels, exploitable and a highly exploitable. The white top means that they've reached a level of exploitability that is clearly well beyond marginal. It generally represents the top 10 to 20% of the player pool. We'll get more on this in a minute, but a white top can be roughly interpreted as any two cards. This player folds so much that any two cards work. You don't need any type of backdoor type equity to make that bluff work. They will fold enough that mathematically you can make that move with anything. The second row has all to do with pots that they were the caller preflop. Either they called an open or they called a 3-bet. And so think about the spot you're in. Are they the caller or are they the raiser? And then you know which row to look at. Everything post-flop is arranged by street and pot type. It goes flop, turn, and river. Pretty obvious there. Single raise pots are first, and then once all the single raise pots badges are there, then it starts showing 3-bet pots. So in this case, this player only has one pre-flop, only one single raised pot flop badge, and so immediately after that, it switches to 3-bet badges. This player has a number of single raised pot badges, and then the 3-bet badges start. Now the bottom row, the first 8 badges, if they have all the badges, are going to be bet size and exploitabilities, flop, turn, and river. And then on the flop, we also have separate single raised pot and 3-bet pots. Now on the turn and river, since there's no 3-bet pots, this is just overall. And then there's a couple miscellaneous river badges that go on this final row. River fold, river hero call, river bet fold, river bluff. Next, let's talk about what makes a badge activate. It's a bit complex, but I'll try not to make it too complicated. Let's just talk about this first badge. Now, the badge is activated by an internal formula. So in this case, this is check fold, flop check fold. The green background means flop, CF means check fold. Now, in the dynamic package, all the badges use multiple stats. So the internal formula will take their flop check fold frequency when missing a flop c-bet in a single raise pot, their flop check call in that same spot, and their fold versus a turn follow-up bet, same spot. And calculates their exploitability based upon those 3 frequencies. And if they're folding enough, then the badge activates. If they are folding on the turn at an exploitable level, this badge will actually be half blue. So a half green, half blue CF badge would mean fold versus flop stab, followed by a turn follow-up bet, where either part or all the exploitability is on the turn follow-up. Now, this player does not have that, and so it doesn't mean that they're necessarily non-exploitable on the turn. It can also mean that we just don't have a sample size of hands for that. But in any case, we have no information on that, so it's just a simple check fold badge. Now, when the exploitability is just beyond break even and then up to a certain level, they just get a plain badge, no white top. When the exploitability reaches a certain level, they get a white top. Now, when a badge gets a white top is different for different spots. It's meant to represent clear high exploitability in that spot, and also represent the top 10 to 20% of folders in that spot, and that's the top 10 to 20% of other regs that fold in that spot. And those two combined make this spot a very high probability a profit spot. Now, in other spots, we won't have that half-colored badge showing up for the follow-up move. In other spots, especially the second row, you'll be looking for a second badge. Let me see if there's any examples of this. Yeah, there's no really good examples here of follow-up badges, but I will show you this pre-flop example. This player has a pink BT badge, which is fold versus 3-bet when open the button, and they have the follow-up C-bet badge. We can tell that by the white bottom and the green background. And so that means that, and of course all 3 stats are used here. fold the button versus a 3-bet, call the 3-bet, and then fold versus a flop C-bet, win on the button in a 3-bet pot. And so this pre-flop badge is activating not because they're necessarily exploitable pre-flop, they may or may not be, but they are exploitable, clearly exploitable on the flop because they have a white top here. And so in spots like this, you have to, after you make the bet, basically the first badge will indicate this player is exploitable, so bet as wide as you feel comfortable, and then you just look over here and see if there's a follow-up badge here. Now, to give ourselves some margin for error post-flop, whenever there's a flop or turn badge, we don't take into account equity. So, let's say that you're bluffing with a gut shot or 2 overs or anything like that. That equity is completely ignored in order to give each of these badges a built-in margin for error. And so the badge won't just activate when it's just marginally profitable. Now, the level 1 badges, the non-white top badges, if you are using these badges to bluff with absolutely no equity, yeah, the profit in worst case scenario would be the sample size is small enough and the previous hands are not represented that are played, but ignoring that, the worst case scenario is with no equity, your profit is very, very marginal in a spot like that. But given the way these badges are set up and with that equity in there, for the most part, you're going to be fine. Now, these pre-flop badges, and I left these for a second because these are a little bit more complicated. Same basic idea, except with pre-flop badges, we were forced to include some value for flop connectivity. The reason we don't have to on the flop and turn is because there's only one card coming. And so while there is equity there, it's not a huge amount of equity. It's an amount of equity that we're fine leaving for a margin of error. Now, with the flop having 3 cards, there's a lot more equity involved there. And if we made these badges only appear at mathematical exploitability between the 3-bet and the flop C-bet, you wouldn't get very many badges, and you would be missing out on a huge number of profitable spots. I actually made a fairly big study of this over the past year as to what sort of fold frequencies, what sort of combination of fold frequencies and flop connectivity. And by flop connectivity, I mean value hands, draws, backdoor draws, basically any way that you're going to have equity in the hand and be able to bet multiple streets with either equity or made hands. And the numbers came out amazingly low. I was really surprised when I started digging down in that, how much equity flop connectivity a hand like King 2 suited has. It really is amazing. And so after experimenting around with that, for pre-flop badges, these versus steal and these versus 3-bet badges, we roughly added in what we consider to be half the flop connectivity to the badges and left the other half of the flop connectivity to be the margin of error in those spots. So what does that mean for your gameplay? So, or rather, what I should say, what does that mean for you developing your game plans? These badges are meant to represent players who are significantly more exploitable than average. At the most, these badges will represent the top 40% of folders. A lot of the badges only represent anywhere as little as 20% to 30%. I mean, it depends on the badge, but clearly more than average. And so the absence of a badge should not prevent you from making a standard move. For example, let's say you're on the flop in position, you've got queen high with a gut shot and 2 overs. That would be a pretty standard C-bet for a lot of players, I think. There may be some exceptions there based upon opponent tendencies and exact board textures, but that's a pretty good C-bet. And if you saw they had no badge in that particular spot, say you're on the button and you're looking at the VBT badge for versus button C-bet, no badge there, I would still C-bet that if that's something you normally C-bet. Barely, say you've got 2 overs on the flop, you C-bet, you turn a gut shot, that's also a scare card. I'd still be barreling that without a badge. The badges are meant to represent additional opportunities on top of that. Um, you should be using level 1 badge to expand your ranges, your frequencies a little bit. And you should be using the level 2 badge to expand your ranges a lot. Now, I oftentimes refer to these white top badges as any 2 card badges. And the way the formula is set up, I mean, literally any 2 cards would be profitable to make that move there. Now, do I take it that far? No. And I do think that's a mistake that some players make, is they go crazy with the badges. And even if a player is highly exploitable in a spot like that, if you go crazy enough versus them, if you make the move too much, I think you potentially end up changing their play, or your numbers start looking so out of whack that they kind of feel forced to change what they're doing versus you. And my game has always been centered around the idea that I want to take advantage of players who are folding at a clearly exploitable level in an individual spot to the point where they're uncomfortable, but not to the point where they feel like they have to fight back to make me stop. And that can be a bit of a fine line to walk there, but I guess my general advice there is take advantage, but don't go crazy there. And I'm still kind of working on myself. How far do I want to take these particular badges? And I'm going to do a detailed review of what I do versus 3-bet badges, and hopefully that'll help kind of explain my reasoning here. And when it comes to post-flop bluffing, I generally like to have some form of equity, a gut shot, 1 or 2 overs, something going for me. And certainly, if they have a single exploit badge, they're absolutely going to bet with that range. Now, if they have the high exploit badge, it's just kind of a rule of thumb. How's the day going? How much have I been betting in a spot like this? If I'm going to try to do things with absolutely no equity. But the way the badges are set up, you just take this as far as you're comfortable, but I would just advise not to take it too terribly far. So let's talk about using these high exploit badges in pre-flop spots, and this is a good player to look at. So this player has a pink 4, which means fold versus 4-bet, and we can see here in his stats he folds 70% of the time, which is very high. Now he has a high exploit badge, which, as I said, in my mind I roughly think of as any 2 cards. Now, am I going to 4-bet bluff this guy with any 2 cards? No. If I open up an EP, he 3-bets me in the cutoff, am I going to try to 4-bet bluff him? No. Absolutely not. Now, what I will do, though, is let's say I'm in the cutoff and he's in the small blind or any other still position, and I've got an ace or king blocker. This type of badge means absolutely yes, I'm going to bluff him. If I'm on the button and he's in the small blind, saying the small blind is the spot he likes to 3-bet the most, which a lot of guys do because it's tough to cold call there. I might not even need an ace or king blocker. I may just take any 2 cards and do it there. But and that's how I'm using the any 2 card. If we're in 2 positions where it's unlikely he's 3-bet bluffing me that much, I'm not going to let this badge change what I'm doing. I'm going to wait until we're in a more conventional spot. If the spot is borderline, like I'm in the cutoff, then I'm going to have an ace or king blocker. If the spot is more likely to be profitable, such button versus small blind, maybe I don't even need a blocker there. Now, more interesting, I think, is how I use these badges when it comes to 3-betting. So we need to talk about a couple different hand groupings here. So first off, we have EP and MP that we need to discuss by itself. Now, EP and MP are combined together in one badge because I think each position plays close enough. Each position plays similarly enough that we can combine those. So, as a general rule, I am never going to 3-bet bluff an EP or MP open without a badge. This is a spot, particularly if you're in position, this is a spot that is difficult to find profitability. Based upon my database analysis of a lot of players' hands, blind's a little bit better, but still, as a general rule, no bluffing until I see a badge, an EP or MP. Now, if I see a single exploit badge, which is the non-white top, just the colored top, I'm going to use my best flop connectivity hands, which are going to be, in my mind, suited aces, suited connectors, on top of any hand, in addition to any hand that I'm willing to stack off with. Now, if this player has a white top, which this player does, then I can go wider than that. Especially now if I'm in position, because I know that to be a difficult spot to make profitable, even against high folders, I'm probably not going to go wider than my high flop connectivity hands, the mid-suited connectors, the suited aces. Now, if I'm out of position, I'm in the blinds, those are usually easier to make profitable because you have less players left to act is the primary reason for that, even though you do lose your positional advantage. And they have the high exploit badge. Now I'm going to start using, say, maybe like some offsuit aces, some suited one gappers. Just take it out a little bit further because they have the high exploit badge. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is the button in the small blinds, and things can get pretty crazy there. Now, if a player is lacking a badge in the button or small blind, that doesn't mean that you can't bluff. What my general plan is when there's no badge, when a player has no badge in the button or small blind, I'm going to 3-bet my value hands, anything I'm willing to stack off with, my extended value hands, which to me is ace, queen, king, queen, nines or tens, sometimes yes, sometimes no, depends on how I feel about playing for stacks with those hands. Sometimes I just call them if I don't know what I want to do there. It can be hands, maybe ace jack suited, along with my high flop connectivity hands, mid suited connectors, suited aces. And so no badge, that's kind of like my standard range. I think it's fairly well balanced. Those hands have enough flop connectivity to the low value hands that even against low folders, I'll be doing fine there. Now, as soon as a badge shows up, either on the button or the small blind, we're talking about a level 1 badge, then I start expanding my bluffing ranges, using suited one gappers more, suited kings more, offsuit aces would be my first step. And also, for me, when a badge appears, I also stop using my second tier hands, my second tier value hands, the ace, queen, king, queen, nines, tens, ace, jack, stuff like that, because I feel like when a player is folding at a mathematically exploitable level, I would rather expand my 3-bet bluff ranges and then cold call with other hands that I feel are going to be profitable. And so that's roughly my range against small blind and the button level 1 exploits. Now, once the player reaches this high exploit, the game really opens up here, and this is either in the button or the small blind. And what I do in that spot is now my rule is I cold call with everything that's playable, which would mostly be my suited aces, suited connectors, all my Broadways, stuff like that. And I 3-bet any hand I'm willing to stack off with, and I'm now 3-bet bluffing any hand that comes in right below what I think I can call with in that particular spot. And so I could be 3-bet bluffing hands like Jack 2 suited. I could actually be 3-betting hands like Jack 2 off if I really wanted to push it far. I mean, once they have this, particularly the button in the small blind white top, I mean, it's extremely profitable to 3-bet them with any 2 cards. Now, once again, the only real question here is how far do you want to take that and potentially wake them up to what you're doing. You also have to be a little bit concerned that, very few of your hands are going to make it to showdown, but if you end up showing down a hand like Jack 2 offsuit, that's even a player that folds a lot is going to notice something like that. So you've got to be careful about how far you push those really, really low value 3-bet bluffs. But according to how the badges are set up, you could do that in a vacuum. It's just the question of if he's going to realize what you're going to do. And so you just need to think through this. You need to think about how far am I willing to push this. What I generally recommend to players is use like weak suited hands. Weak jack suited, weak queen suited, suited 2 gappers, stuff like that. Hands that are probably okay as a cold call, but with somebody folding so much, they're clearly good as a 3-bet, and do that. And then maybe when the spot feels right, maybe start dipping down in some really weak offsuit stuff. But hopefully that gives you some insight into how I do that. Now the cutoff is kind of an in-between position. I'm not going to be as tight as I am versus EP and MP opens. I'm not going to be nearly as loose as I am versus button opens. And it's just going to be a modified plan between those two based upon if they're single exploitable or high exploitable. Typically, without a badge, I won't be doing a lot of bluffing versus them. Say, like versus a no badge button or small blind, I was happy doing suited aces and mid-suited connectors. I'd much rather just call those in the big blind. I might 3-bet bluff those in the small blind because I don't feel like I can cold call them there. But other than that, I'm probably going to let them go without a badge. And then, but as they get the 2 badges, my ranges are definitely wider than they would be versus EP-MP, but not nearly as wide as they would be versus the button. Now, one last really important point when it comes to using these badges. For a lot of players, these badges are going to have you bluffing with hands that are weaker than you would normally bluff with. It's extremely important not to try to save your bluffs. These badges are set up to show you exploitability in that spot. If there's exploitability in the next spot, a badge will show up. Now, that's not to say that, if you bluff and you turn your backdoor equity, backdoor flush draw or whatever, yeah, sure, that's fine. But I'm saying that if you hit the next street and you got nothing, just give it up. It's no big deal. The badge is there because they're exploitable in that spot, and there's no follow-up there. Then don't follow up. I see way too many guys using the badges effectively, but then they keep trying to save moves, and that's not how it works. The badge needs to be there if you're going to try a no equity follow-up. I should also address the all badges. All badges are a part of the second line. These are to take the place of all the positional fold versus c-bet badges. If we were to have all the positional badges in there, for many players this line would be much too long because there's you could have, I don't know, 30 badges in worst case scenario here. So by having an all badge here, that helps cut down on the clutter when a player plays very exploitably. A high exploit all badge will activate when a player has been exploitable in 5 out of 6 of the badge spots. There's a total of 6 positions: EP, MP, in position, out of position, cutoff, in position, out of position, button in the small blind. And that's, of course, and we're talking, of course, versus 3 bets here. If they are exploitable in 5 out of 6 of those spots, you get a high exploit white top badge. The 6th spot that's perhaps not exploitable, yeah, this badge may have you betting in one position that's not been exploitable over past play, but given they're exploitable 5 out of 6, I think you can feel fairly safe that that 6th position is probably just variance. And then the regular all badge, is there any regular? That's high exploit. Yeah, the regular all badge, no white top, means that they are exploitable in 4 out of 6 spots, which is not quite as good as 5 out of 6, but if they're non-exploitable or the sample size doesn't exist in those big enough sample size doesn't exist in the last 2 spots, yeah, it could have you c-betting possibly into a position that's not folding, but given they are exploitable, clearly exploitable in 4 out of 6 spots, it's still probably a pretty good c-bet. But you can go to the pop-ups if you want to see positionally what's going on. And if I have a good sample size on a player and they just have a level 1 all badge, I will fairly regularly go in and just check, especially if it's in a high frequency spot. Check and make sure they are exploitable versus that position c-bet. But the high exploit all badges I just trust and plan on following through with the c-bet in whatever spot that represents whenever I have the opportunity to bluff. All right, next let's talk about using the badges with integrated bet sizing. We have the versus button and small blind steals, versus 3 bets, and then post flop we've got flop, single raise pot, 3-bet pot, and then turn and river. Let's talk about pre-flop first and how I use these. Now, this is a spot where I'm not completely comfortable with what I'm doing yet. Still kind of toying around with it. When I talk about the theory sounds my plan sounds good, but when I'm in gameplay, I'm still not totally comfortable using these various sizes. I don't know, maybe it's just my own comfort level with doing something new. But so here's what I'm doing. Let's just talk about versus steals. Let's just talk about in the small blind. Well, first, let me tell you how these badges are calculated. Like everything else, it's all internal calculations. In the case of versus steals, it takes the player's exploitability against each bet size. So for small bets, it uses 2 to 2.33. For medium bets, and that's big blinds, it uses 2.33 to 2.66. And then for larger bets, larger steals, it uses 2.67 to 3.0. And it calculates what bet sizing gives you the best risk versus return based upon their folding frequency and the amount of money you're risking. And whatever one comes out the winner is the one that shows up here. And so what I'm doing right now is I just straight use these bet sizings both for 3-bet pots and for single raise pots. Now, this does have me, and also when somebody has a 3-bar steal, which means 2.67 to 3.0, I am using the very bottom of that. So, 2 3/4, 2 2/3, X type sizing. In that spot, because 3x just feels too uncomfortable on the button. But for 3-bet sizing and every other spot, and every other still spot, I just use the sizing that's recommended by the badge. If there's no sizing, then I just go with my standard opening sizing in a spot like that. Now, obviously, if that bet sizing gives us the best risk versus reward on a bluff, it also gives us the worst, it's the worst bet sizing to use with value hands. However, I don't feel comfortable using one size for bluffing and one size for value for obvious reasons. So what I do is I just use the same sizing for my entire range. And my thought is anytime a player has a badge, that means that I am going to be bluffing them at a higher than average frequency and probably a pretty large, not probably, a large portion of my range, even a majority of my range, will be bluffs, low value hands, and so I feel like long term over my entire range, I'll make the most money there because I have so many bluffs in spots like that, taking advantage of their exploitability. Now, post flop is where it really becomes. I think pre-flop. It's not that I get uncomfortable sometimes with using all these different sizes, but I think it's more just getting accustomed to it, and I am really curious if players are seeing it and reacting to it. I don't know. But post-flop, that's where it gets a little bit more difficult. So this player is showing a very clear pattern that, and B is bluff, and V is value. So bluff is calculated what gives us the best risk versus return in each spot. Value is calculated what gives us what sizing gives us the most calls based upon value returned with sizing. And so we can see here a very clear pattern of this guy playing in such a way that small bluffs work best and large value bets work best. Now, on the flop, it's saying a half pot bluff size gets you the best risk versus return, and a full pot size value bet gets you the best return for your value hands. Now, am I going to bet 50% with bluff and full pot size with value? No. Once again, we have the pre-flop issue of your range, your hand strength being telegraphed by your bet size, and I'm still unsure how much players can pick up on that, especially when we're doing different things against each individual player, but it's enough of a worry that I'm not going to fully use these badges. But, could I go 60% sizing for bluffs, 70% sizing for value? Absolutely. And that is what I would do against a player like this. If my average sizing in most spots is around 2/3 pot, I'm going to drop it down some for bluffs, drop it up more for value. This player has a bit of an opposite thing going on, at least pre-flop. Oh, no, no, no. I read that wrong because there's no B there. Um, yeah, this guy is a little bit opposite. He folds better to the pot size flop bluffs and gives the best value to 2/3 of value bets. And so my plan here would be opposite with him. My bluffs would go a little bit larger. My value bets I would go a little bit smaller. And of course, that's extremely general advice. There's position, board texture, backdoor equity, a lot of things that go into bet sizing. And when you actually get into trying to implement this kind of knowledge into your game, at least I found that a lot of spots just kind of set bet sizing based upon those type of factors. And so it's not like every hand I'm just going, my hand value, their badge, and picking a bet size. And that's a pretty good point to make about just using HUDs in general. If I have a line in a certain spot that's fairly standard, I'm going to be using that badge. I'm going to be using that line regardless of what that player is doing. Where I use badges and stats and all that type of stuff is a marginal spots where there is a couple different lines that have a reasonable chance of working out equally well, and that's when I'm using badges and stats and stuff like that. Now that's not totally true on on badges anymore. Now that we have high exploit badges, that does change up a little bit where I can be taking lines with with total air hands that I would normally just give up because they're so exploitable. But that just becomes a matter of just when you're in those spots, checking and see if they have that badge there. But I kind of got a little bit off track there. I just want to make the point that in a lot of these spots, I'm just using this information to modify what I do by a little bit, be it either the ranges I use or the bet sizing I use. And as you're developing your own game plan with using these badges, that's what I recommend, is figuring out what you're comfortable doing, how far you're willing to push your ranges around, how far you're willing to push your bet sizings around based upon their exploitabilities. And what I recommend is like I said, taking as much advantage as I can without making them feel like they need to do something about whatever it is that I'm doing. The hard part is picking out what is that line and trying to stay fairly close to that line. But hopefully you guys find find all this informative as far as how I use these badges in gameplay. And I really think it's all about making small to moderate changes in your gameplay based upon your opponent unbalanced play. All right, last, let's talk about the HUD itself. First up, our use of raise first in and cold call instead of VPIP and PFR. Frankly, VPR and PFR are simply used because that's what the first guy who made a HUD 10 years ago was using, and everybody's used it since then. You need to ask yourself, what do you use VPIP and PFR for? First off, to identify who's a recreational player, who's a reg, who's aggressive, who's passive. And what we're really asking though is, how much are they opening, how much are they cold calling, how much are they three betting? And that's a problem with PFR, is PFR includes all pre-flop raises. So you could have two players with identical PFRs, but one player steals a lot more and the other player three bets a lot more. And I don't like using stats that can show identical results like that with two different player types. And I'd rather just go directly to the information that I want. And now if one stat will take the place of two or three other stats, that's fine, but that's not the case here, because we just directly replace VPIP with raise first in and then PFR with cold calls. So it's the same number of stats, and then of course we still have three bets here, so we're able to also determine that. And so since I just think it's a matter of habit, it should be something that people can change if they want. And I just find these numbers to be a more accurate reflection of what I want to know about my opponents without adding additional stats. Because remember, one of the core concepts in creating this HUD was efficiency, and part of that is the size of the HUD. And sure, we could have cold call raise first in by position, VPIP, PFR, 3-bet by position. I mean, literally, we could have a HUD with 100 numbers on it. I don't know if it fit on the table, but we could do it. But I don't think that's efficient. I think that's the exact opposite of efficient. And the vast majority of players are not going to be able to utilize a HUD like that. And so, we had to consider each number carefully. And, to us, it didn't make sense to have all those additional stats on there when they were just kind of saying the same thing. And I especially don't think it's good to have VPIP and PFR when you don't have raise first in and cold call as part of your on-table HUD. So that's why we made the switch. If you want to switch back to VPIP and PFR, there's instructions in the HUD documentation that you can make that switch quite easily. But I would encourage you to at least try it out. And it's just a matter of learning to interpret these two numbers. A very basic explanation is that if cold call is greater than raise first in, they're very likely a recreational player. The higher cold call is versus raise first in, the higher their loss rate in general. Most regs are going to be what you see here, in which their raise first in is about double that of their cold call. We have a 30-16, a 30-13, and a 39 here. We also have a 29-2. There are exceptions. There are some regs who can go as high as like a 30-20, a 30-22. But at some point, those players are not winning because they're simply just calling way too much. Although there can be, that's where it can get a little bit tough to figure out who's the halfway decent playing recreational player and who's the regular who calls too much. That's the only tough part I have about reading here. But I just feel like these, especially after playing with this HUD for a while, I just feel like these numbers are just so much more reflective of the type of information that I want to have. But that's up to you. Decide if you want to use those or not. So let's talk about the layout of the HUD very quickly. Small box is all pre-flop. We of course have raise first in and cold call, and then we have number of hands. And then after that, we have 3-bet in position, out of position, 4-bet. So these are all aggression moves. And then last line is all folding moves. VS is versus steal, specifically big blind versus button steal versus 3-bet and then versus 4-bet. Post flop, all the C-bet information is on the first line. First number is C-bet in single raise pots, heads up only. Inside the parentheses is C-bet in multi-way pots. Third inside the brackets is C-bet heads up in a 3-bet pot. Then we have double barrel, single raise pots, heads up, and then double barrel 3-bet pot, heads up, and then last we have triple barrel in a single raise pot only. If we want to know triple barrel in a 3-bet pot, then we just go to the pop-up and look at it here. Just one of those things that we felt that without huge sample sizes you wouldn't get accurate information for, and it wasn't didn't need a spot on the HUD. Below that we have fold versus flop C-bet in all the identical spots as you see in the above row of hands. Last line, first off is bet river. Bet river is a favorite stat of mine. I think it's the best indication we have of an opponent's river aggression. I'm not a big fan of aggression factors because they factor in, obviously they include calls, raises, folds. Different combinations of numbers can create similar aggression factors, and we have all the information in our HUD already. We have betting, raising, calling, folding, and so I just rather look at those types of information, those individual frequencies to figure out, is this guy aggressive or not. And bet river I just think is a great one to have, but also, and almost equally importantly, our bet river contains all of our general bet river range graphs. And if we were to try to put those in the triple barrel pop-up, the triple barrel pop-up would just get way too big, especially if you got a lot of hands on a player. It'd be bigger than your screen, and so that was part of the reasoning also. Then we have showdown, the percentage of times they go to showdown. Raise in position, flop, single raise pot. Check raise, flop, single raise pot. And then fold versus raise, also on the flop. So let's last talk about how to find pop-up information. So the first step is just think about where's your opponent at in this hand. So you have to ask yourself, was it the pre-flop aggressor or the pre-flop caller? Well, that'll tell you if it's on the first line or second line. Then you got to think about the spot and the pre-flop action. So let's say that we wanted to know how much a player folds versus flop donk bet. Okay, so that means that he was the pre-flop aggressor. It was a single raise pot. So we go to C-bet, single raise pot, and we can see versus donk bet, fold, call, and raise. Let's say that we want to know an opponent's call raise on the flop and then fold versus the follow-up turn bet. So pre-flop action was he was the opener. Let's just say it was single raise pots, and now we're on the turn. So we want to go to double barrel, single raise pot, and there we go. Fold versus flop raise plus turn bet out of position and in position. We've got some really cool color coding here that will also help you find what you're looking for. Green means that this player on the previous street, his last action was that of the better. So that's why we have all the two barrel information on here, because obviously he c-bet on the flop and now he's on the turn, so it's in the green section. The blue section means that his last action on the previous street was that of a check. And so if we're looking at turn fold versus a out of position stab, which means he checked on the flop and now we're on the turn, now we have his stab. I should also say that in position would be he was in position, he checked, and then now he's facing a turn stab. Now out of position would mean that since his last action on the flop was check, that means the flop went check, check, and now this guy is checking on the turn, and he's now faced with his opponent betting, what I call delayed stab. But the important thing is his last action on the flop was a check, and he's out of position, and that's the only way we can get there is through a missed flop c-bet, the opponent checks back, now we're on the turn, and he checks, and he's faced with a turn stab, and he's folded 4 out of 5 times. And then lastly, red means that his last action on the previous street was a call. So that's why we have fold versus flop raise. So he bet called and now turn bet. And so if you can just remember that color coding, it's just a very simple process. What was the pre-flop action? What is the flop spot, or what is the post-flop spot? And what was his last action on the previous street? And that'll take you directly to what you're looking for. And so instead of going through this long pop-up with 50 different numbers in it, and then having to memorize where everything's at and find it in the 5 seconds you have in gameplay, you should at a minimum be able to go to the correct color code and only have to look at 4 or 5 stats, maybe a dozen stats, and just find it from there. The system is really, really good. In order to find pop-ups, the pop-ups will generally be in the same pop-up. And so you just go through the same process. What was a pre-flop action? Where are we at post-flop? Go to that, pop it up, and then it'll be listed down here, and you just go for it. So let's say our opponent does a delayed c-bet out of position. So they're out of position on the flop. They check, their opponent checks back, and now, or we check back, because obviously we're interested because we're in the hand, and now they bet on the turn, a delayed c-bet. So the action was there, the aggressor, we're on the turn, single raise pot, so we go to this pop-up. His last action on the previous street was a check, so we go to the blue section, and now we have delayed c-bet, out of position, in position, below. We have delayed c-bet, fold versus raise. So now we know all his frequencies. Now, if we want to know his ranges in a spot like that, then we just go down here and we find the same wording as delayed c-bet out of position. We see a spark graph. Delayed c-bet in position. We see another spark graph. One of the new additions to NoteCaddy with NoteCaddy 2.5 is pie graphs, in which you can actually see what the hand ranges were. Sometimes I find these spark graphs to be a little bit confusing as far as, what do the sparks exactly mean, especially when things are in the black area. Sometimes I see areas that are in this mid-range black area that to me seem like really weak. And the way these things are figured out is a hand strength algorithm, and there's no way it can be perfect. But, if you have the amount of time that can take this pop-up and just quickly see what sort of hands were there, that's going to be a very good indicator of if you have enough hands of the range construction. And if you do have the time, you can also go here to the replayer, and now instead of replaying hands, it now shows the opponent's holding and their actions on different spots. And so once again, if you have a little bit of time to look at something, you're in a tricky spot, you can look at this and see. Lastly, we have the bet size scatter graphs, which will help us see if there's a connection between bet size and hand strength. Now, this player, to me, has a fairly clear pattern of bet size, of hand strength and bet size being connected. The best way to tell this is to draw a box, just mentally draw a box around the scatter graphs. And if things are in a right tipping rectangle, that's an indication of larger bet sizes equals hand strengths, because there's more hands that have both larger bet size and hand value up here, and then down here in the bottom, there's more hands that have smaller bet size and smaller hand strength. And you can see that we can draw a right leaning rectangle box on all four of these graphs. And so if you see this guy betting larger, I would give him a lot more credit for hand. If he's betting smaller, I would give him a significantly less credit for having a made hand here. One last thing, I would warn you against using these range graphs and spark graphs too much in non-showdown spots. Now, I do use the bet size quite a bit, but I get a little bit worried about, the earlier the street is, the more I worry about using these spark graphs, because obviously value hands are much more likely to make the showdown than non-showdown, non-valuable hands. And so this stuff gets weighted to more valuable hands. Now, we do use implicit weakness here, which means they ended up folding. But while that's largely reflected of bluff hands, that's also reflected of bad board textures or them making really big folds versus their opponents. And now, however, when it comes to showdown spots like river betting, I am using spark graphs, range graphs all the time, and you can really find some amazingly accurate information about your opponent's range construction, connection between bet size and hand strength. Looking at stuff like this, like we can see this player when he's betting in these small pots has been caught bluffing a lot. Now it's probably some variance here. But clearly, if this guy is betting in a small pot, we need to be bluff catching with ace high based upon this information. Now, once the pot gets bigger, look at how these spark graphs shift to the right. 25 to 50, they shift to the right again. 50 big blind, maybe they don't totally shift to the right, but at least a little bit. It feels like they're shifting to the right. They're certainly not shifting to the left. So very clearly, we can see here that as the river pot gets bigger, this guy goes more and more value heavy. And then, of course, if you go to the river bet pop-up, the bet river pop-up is just for a general pot is this size, this is his range construction. Now, in the triple barrel pop-up, now we have all these individual spots. 3-barrel in position, out of position, delayed C-bets, out of position, then bet the river, double delayed C-bets, which means flop and turn got checked, and now they're betting the river. Pretty much any situation that is possible on the river will be included in here, as long as there's a sample size to actually give us some information on that spot. Well, I think I've gone on long enough. I think this video is a bit over an hour. And yeah, I think I accomplished what I wanted to give you guys, what insight I can in a single video as to how to use this HUD. Like I said at the beginning, it's a matter of practice and memorization. But I wouldn't be selling this HUD if I didn't think that it added a significant amount of value to players' games, and I really do think it does that better than any other HUD out there, and it's not even close. All right, guys, and I didn't say it before, but I do appreciate you purchasing our HUD. I hope you enjoy using it, and if you have any problems, just contact us via support.